In a world of power and control, billionaire Landon Hayes is used to getting what he wants, until Sienna Monroe walks into his life. Struggling with her own demons, Sienna challenges everything Landon thought he knew about love and vulnerability. As their worlds collide, emotions run deep and secrets unravel. Will Landon's obsession turn into love, or will it destroy them both? Their passionate journey will have you on the edge of your seat, craving more. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more captivating stories. The city lights shimmered like a blanket of gold draped over midnight, the glass towers of downtown reflecting the pulse of a world that never slept. Inside a private lounge perched on the top floor of one of those towers, Landon Hayes sat alone, swirling a glass of aged bourbon with a gaze that could freeze fire. At 33, he was the youngest self-made billionaire in the city, a man whose name commanded boardrooms and struck fear into competitors. He was power incarnate, calculated, cold, and never known to chase anything he couldn't buy or predict. Love, in his eyes, was just another distraction, one he had never afforded the luxury of entertaining. But tonight, there was something strange in the air. A restless unease sat in his chest like a storm cloud refusing to move. He told himself he had come here to clear his mind, to find momentary relief from the incessant war of numbers and negotiations. What he didn't expect was her. Sienna Monroe stepped through the double doors, unaware of the shift she was about to cause. She wasn't the type to be here. The bar was all glass, marble, and exclusivity. But something in her had snapped earlier that day. A final notice taped to her apartment door. A call from her younger brother's clinic asking for overdue payments. 2 jobs, endless bills, and still, she was drowning. So she had slipped into the first dress that made her feel like she wasn't collapsing. Black, simple, clinging to her body like shadow, and wandered into a place she didn't belong. Her hazel eyes scanned the room, nervous but determined, and when they landed on him, something unseen sparked in the silence between them. Landon saw her before she even crossed the threshold. It wasn't just her beauty, though there was no denying it. It was the stillness in her, the raw honesty in her gaze that made her stand out like a breath of cold air in a world that reeked of artifice. She wasn't performing. She wasn't playing a game. She was real. And he hadn't realized until that moment how starved he was for something real. He watched her order a drink, her fingers twitching slightly against the stem of the glass. She didn't flirt. She didn't look around for attention. And still she had all of his. He rose before he could stop himself, driven by an instinct older than logic. The moment he approached her, she turned. Their eyes met, and time seemed to pause, just long enough for her cheeks to flush and her lips to part slightly in surprise. "You don't seem like the type to drink alone in a place like this," he murmured, his voice low and smooth, but edged with something dangerous. Her eyes held his. "And you don't seem like the type to talk to strangers." There was a quiet defiance in her tone, not sharp, but grounded. Landon felt his lips twitch into something dangerously close to a smile. "Maybe tonight's an exception," he said, sliding into the seat beside her. "What are you drinking?" She hesitated. "Just a cocktail." "Let me guess," he drawled. "You don't come to places like this often." She nodded. "It's not really my scene." "Then why are you here?" She looked down for a moment, then back up, her eyes suddenly softer. "Sometimes you just need a different view, even if you can't afford the view." That answer hit deeper than he expected. They talked about nothing and everything. The world faded. Time, once his fiercest master, now seemed irrelevant. Landon couldn't remember the last time a conversation had held him so effortlessly. And when he leaned in closer, when the scent of her skin mixed with the soft tremble in her voice, he knew without question, this wasn't a woman he would forget. This was a beginning, one he couldn't afford to walk away from. The night wore on, each second feeling like a drawn-out thread, stitching them closer together. Landon had never been a man to lose control, but as he sat beside Sienna, every word she spoke seemed to unravel the perfect armor he had spent years crafting. They continued talking, their conversation drifting seamlessly from one topic to another, light, effortless. But beneath the surface, there was an undeniable tension building between them. His usual arrogance and emotional distance melted away in her presence, leaving something raw, something unsettling. Sienna laughed softly at something he said, a sound that made his chest tighten, though he couldn't explain why. She wasn't pretending. She wasn't hiding anything behind a veil of politeness or charm. There was a quiet honesty about her that felt like a secret, one he didn't know he needed to hear until now. But even as the words flowed between them, there was an unspoken awareness hanging in the air, an invisible pull neither of them could ignore. Every glance, every gesture, made the space between them shrink, until the noise of the bar around them faded, leaving only their shared silence. Landon watched her as she looked down at her drink, her fingers nervously tapping the edge of her glass. He found himself suddenly wanting to know more, wanting to understand what made her laugh so easily. What made her voice tremble slightly when she spoke of her life? There was something in the way she carried herself, an unguarded vulnerability beneath the surface, that both drew him in and terrified him. She wasn't like the women he was used to. They were polished, calculated, and seemed to have the same agenda: money, status, and the lure of his empire. But Sienna? She was different. He could see it in her eyes, the quiet sadness she carried, the weight of her reality that she never said aloud. The words tumbled out before he could stop himself. "Why don't you let me help you?" Sienna's expression shifted, a flicker of hesitation crossing her face before she masked it with a polite smile. She lifted her glass to her lips, taking a slow sip as though to buy herself time. "I don't need your help." The words were soft but firm, laced with an unspoken challenge. Landon wasn't sure why, but those words struck a chord within him. He didn't like the idea of her struggling, of her living a life that seemed so far beneath the world he lived in. It was unfair, he thought, and it tugged at something inside him he had long ago buried. "I don't mean money," he clarified, his voice low. "I'm talking about something else, something that doesn't involve transactions." Sienna's eyes met his, sharp and questioning, like she was searching for any hint of insincerity. But she didn't find any. There was no hidden agenda behind his words, no calculated move, just a raw impulse he couldn't explain. She shifted slightly in her seat, her gaze softening for just a moment before she sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly as though the weight of her life pressed down on her. "You don't know what it's like," she said quietly, "to have to scrape by, to fight for every little thing, and then have people like you tell me there's another way. It's easier said than done, Landon." He could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the way she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. She was more than just a woman in a bar to him now. She was a person. Someone who had lived through hardship in a way he couldn't even begin to understand. He leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know it's not easy," he said, his tone sincere. "But I'm not offering you a way out to control you, Sienna. I'm offering you a chance to breathe, to live without constantly looking over your shoulder. You don't have to do this alone." The silence between them grew thick, heavier than the air in the room. Sienna's eyes flicked over his face, searching for any hint of insincerity. But she didn't find it. For a long moment, she was quiet, her thoughts racing as she weighed his offer against everything she had known in her life. She wasn't used to people offering things without expecting something in return. Her lips parted to speak, but the words didn't come right away. Instead, she lowered her gaze, her fingers tracing the edge of her glass. "I don't know if I can trust anyone again," she murmured, almost to herself. "Not after everything." The vulnerability in her voice hit him like a punch. He wanted to reach out, to tell her that it was okay, that she could trust him, that he would keep his promises. But he held back. He didn't want to rush her, didn't want to make her feel cornered. But he could feel it deep inside. He needed her to know she wasn't alone, that no matter how tangled her life had become, he could help untangle it. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice steady, though his heart was anything but. "And neither are you. Not if I can help it." The words hung between them, charged with something more than just promises. There was an unspoken agreement forming, a mutual pull neither of them could deny. And in that moment, Sienna realized something she hadn't let herself admit before. She was no longer just looking for an escape. She was looking for a reason to stay. Landon couldn't shake the feeling that something in his life had irrevocably shifted. He had always believed in control. The iron grip that kept his empire in place, that kept his emotions buried beneath layers of calculated precision. But with Sienna, that control slipped away like sand through his fingers. He had never been a man of impulse, a man who acted on gut feelings. Yet here he was, unable to stop thinking about her, unable to stop wanting to make her part of his world. He sat at his desk late one night, staring out over the city skyline, his mind clouded with thoughts of her. He couldn't concentrate on his work, couldn't focus on the million-dollar deals that needed his attention. All he could see was the way her hair fell over her face, the way her lips parted when she laughed, the way she had looked at him with both suspicion and something else. Something deeper. And that look, that vulnerability mixed with quiet strength, had branded him in ways he didn't want to admit. It had been a week since their last meeting, since he had dropped the bombshell about wanting to help her. She had hesitated, of course. Who wouldn't? He had known that asking her to move in would push her to the edge of what was comfortable. But what he didn't expect was how deeply her resistance would affect him. He had always gotten what he wanted, and Sienna's refusal left him more rattled than he cared to admit. It was one thing for a woman to resist his charms, but it was another for her to push him away because of something he had no control over. Her past. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock on his office door. Without looking up, he muttered, "Come in." His assistant Greg stepped inside with a folder in hand. "I've got the details on Sienna Monroe, sir. You asked for the financials." Landon straightened, pushing aside the thoughts of her for a moment. "Leave it on my desk," he said, his voice rough. Greg nodded, sensing the tension in the room. He set the folder down and left without saying another word. Landon picked up the folder and scanned its contents, his fingers absently tracing the edges of the paper as his mind wandered back to Sienna. Her life had been a struggle, 2 jobs, late nights, a sick brother depending on her for support. He knew this. He had already suspected it, but seeing the numbers laid out in front of him, seeing how she barely made ends meet, made something inside him tighten. He didn't like it. He didn't like the feeling that someone else's pain was his problem. But it was, and the more he looked at the numbers, the more he realized how much he wanted to fix it, how much he wanted to protect her from it. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from her. "Sienna. I don't need your help, Landon. Please stop." He stared at the message for a moment, the words cutting deeper than he expected. She was still pushing him away, still holding on to her pride. He couldn't blame her for it. He had never been one to ask for help himself. But he couldn't just sit back and watch her struggle when he knew he could make it all disappear with a single phone call. Without thinking, he grabbed his coat and stormed out of the office, the need to see her, to talk to her, overwhelming every other thought. When he arrived at her apartment, he wasn't sure what he expected. She wasn't home. Her car was parked outside, but the door was locked. Landon stood there for a moment, staring up at the dark window, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't used to uncertainty. He wasn't used to feeling like he had no control. But there it was, the raw emotion that she had stirred in him, something he couldn't dismiss. Just as he turned to leave, he heard the door click open. Sienna stood there, dressed in the same clothes she had worn the night they met. She looked tired. No, more than tired. She looked broken. "Landon," she said, her voice soft, hesitant. "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer her immediately. He just took a step forward, closing the space between them until he could reach out and gently take her hand in his. "I'm not leaving," he said, his voice rough. "Not until we talk." Sienna looked at him, her eyes searching his face, and for the first time, he saw the cracks in her defenses. "I don't want to need you, Landon," she whispered, the words full of a pain he hadn't expected. "You don't have to need me," he replied, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "But I need you." Landon couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this way. His entire life had been built on control, on decisions made with ruthless precision. But with Sienna, nothing made sense. He couldn't explain it, couldn't shake it off. Every minute he spent with her felt like a moment of recklessness he never thought he would allow himself. She had become an addiction, something he needed more than air. He had promised himself that he wouldn't let anyone get close enough to break his carefully constructed walls. But Sienna had shattered those walls with a single smile, with a single touch. And now, as much as it terrified him, he couldn't imagine his life without her in it. The days since their last encounter had been filled with frustration. He couldn't focus at work. Every deal, every conversation with his board of directors felt hollow. His thoughts were constantly drawn back to Sienna, to her laugh, to the way her eyes softened when she spoke about her struggles. He was constantly wondering if she was okay, if she was hurting, if she was still fighting that battle alone. It gnawed at him like a constant ache in his chest. And the more he tried to ignore it, the more he realized that there was no ignoring her. It was late one night. Just as the city's lights flickered against the glass of his penthouse windows, that Landon realized he couldn't wait any longer. He had made a promise to himself that he wouldn't rush things, but what was he waiting for? She had already turned his world upside down, and he had no idea how to control it. All he knew was that he couldn't keep living in this limbo, this place where he was constantly second-guessing his every move. He grabbed his jacket and left the penthouse, barely bothering to lock the door behind him. This wasn't about strategy anymore. It was about something real, something that couldn't be measured in profits or losses. He drove to her apartment, his grip tight on the steering wheel, the tension in his body building with each passing mile. He had to see her. He had to make her understand that he wasn't just offering help. He was offering her a life, a future, a life with him. When he arrived, he didn't even wait for her to answer the door. He knocked once, his heart pounding in his chest, and then stepped inside without waiting for permission. The apartment was just as he remembered, small, dimly lit, but there was something about it that made it feel like home. Sienna stood in the doorway, looking surprised, but there was no hesitation in her eyes. She didn't ask why he was there. She didn't need to. He could see it in the way she looked at him. That flicker of something beneath the surface, something that pulled her toward him, just as it pulled him toward her. "I told you, I'm not here to rescue you," he said, his voice low but steady. "I'm here because I want you. I want to be part of your life, Sienna. I can't keep pretending that I don't." She stepped back, a small, shaky breath escaping her lips. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to find the truth in his words. "You don't know what you're asking for, Landon," she whispered, her voice soft but full of uncertainty. "I can't just leave everything behind. I can't just forget everything I've fought for." Landon reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. "I'm not asking you to forget," he said, his thumb brushing over her cheek. "I'm asking you to trust me. Trust that you don't have to fight alone anymore. I'll fight with you." Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked up at him, and for a moment, Landon felt his breath catch in his throat. He had seen many women cry before, tears of frustration, of joy, of sadness, but this was different. This was raw. This was the kind of emotion he wasn't used to seeing from someone who was used to fighting for their survival. He gently wiped away the tear that slipped down her cheek, his fingers trembling with the weight of what he was offering. "I don't want to be your charity case, Landon," she whispered. "I don't want to be someone you feel sorry for." He shook his head, his voice firm. "This isn't about charity. This is about us. I don't want you to feel like you have to do this alone anymore. Let me in, Sienna. Let me take care of you." Her breath hitched, and for a long moment, she didn't say anything. Her eyes searched his face, and Landon could see the inner battle she was fighting. She wanted to trust him. He could feel it in the way she stood there, her body still and open to him. But she was scared. She was scared of being hurt again, of being let down by someone who was offering her something that felt too good to be true. "I'm not asking you to give up who you are," he said, his voice softer now. "I just want to be a part of your world. Let me help you. Let me be the one who doesn't walk away." Slowly, she reached up, her fingers grazing his hand as if she were testing whether or not it was real. Landon held his breath, his entire body on edge as he waited for her response. Finally, she whispered, "Okay?" Landon couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this unsettled. Sitting at his desk in the quiet solitude of his penthouse, he ran his fingers through his hair, trying to focus on the contracts laid out before him. The numbers, the deals, everything was a blur. His mind kept drifting back to Sienna, to her eyes, her voice, the way she had looked at him when she finally let down her guard. He hadn't been prepared for it, any of it. She had broken through his walls faster than he could rebuild them, and now he didn't know how to fix the pieces. He knew he was falling for her, but that terrified him. Landon Hayes didn't fall for anyone. He didn't need to. His life had always been one of calculated decisions, of control. But with Sienna, that control slipped away, little by little. She was raw, unguarded in a way he couldn't quite fathom. She had a strength that was undeniable, but there was also something in her, something fragile that made him want to protect her from the world she had built for herself. A world that left her struggling, fighting to keep her head above water. He reached for his phone and hesitated, staring at it for a long moment. He had already made his decision. There would be no going back. He wanted her, not just for a night, not just for the sake of fulfilling some fleeting desire. He wanted her in his life, in his world, and he couldn't stand the idea of her slipping away before he had a chance to prove that to her. Without thinking, he dialed her number, his fingers shaking slightly as he pressed the call button. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. "Landon?" Her voice was hesitant, the sound of it pulling at his chest. "Sienna, I need to see you, right now." There was a long pause on the other end. "Landon, it's late. I don't know if this is a good idea." His jaw tightened, but he forced the words out, his voice low and filled with determination. "It doesn't matter if it's a good idea. What matters is that I can't stop thinking about you. I can't just walk away from this, from you. Please, just let me come to you." Another silence. He could feel her hesitation from the other side of the line, but when she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost resigned. "All right. But you need to be honest with me, Landon. You've made it clear you want something with me. But I need to know, you're not just doing this because it's a whim, are you?" Her words stung more than he expected, but he didn't let it show. He understood her doubt, her fear. She was right to be cautious. He had never given anyone a reason to believe that his intentions were anything but a calculated move. But he was done playing games. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Sienna. I'm not asking for a fling, I'm asking for something real. And I'm asking you to let me prove that to you." There was a long exhale on the other end of the line. "Okay," she whispered, almost inaudible. "Come over." It didn't take long for Landon to get to her apartment. His mind raced the entire way there. He hadn't been this nervous in years, but this wasn't like any business deal he'd ever closed. This wasn't something he could control with a handshake or a promise. This was a risk, a leap he wasn't sure he was ready to take. When he finally arrived at her door, he didn't knock. He wasn't waiting anymore. He needed to see her, needed to feel her, to know that this wasn't just some fleeting, misguided feeling that would dissipate with time. He had walked through doors before, metaphorically and literally, but this time felt different. Sienna opened the door just as he raised his hand to knock. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes gave away everything he needed to know. She was just as unsure as he was, but there was something else there, a glimmer of hope, of curiosity that hadn't been there before. "I thought you weren't going to show up," she said, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I told you I would," he replied, his voice softer now. "I'm not going anywhere, Sienna." For a moment they just stood there, the weight of unspoken words filling the space between them. He could see the battle in her eyes. She wanted to let him in, but she was afraid. Afraid of what it might mean, of what he might take from her. And in that moment, Landon knew. He couldn't rush her, couldn't force her to let him in. "I'll wait for you," he said quietly, "as long as it takes." Sienna swallowed, her breath shaky. Slowly, she stepped aside, allowing him to cross the threshold. Landon stepped into the apartment, and the world outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them, standing on the edge of something neither could yet define. And as he looked at her, the weight of his feelings settled into something solid, something undeniable. This wasn't just about the physical connection they shared. It was about a future, about a life he wanted to build with her, a life where they didn't have to fight alone. "You don't have to be afraid, Sienna," he murmured, reaching for her hand, gently cupping it in his. "I'm not going anywhere." Lesson learned. This story teaches us that true connections are born not from perfection, but from vulnerability and honesty. Landon Hayes, a man who built his life around control and power, learns that love isn't something you can manipulate or own. It's something you nurture and allow to grow. Sienna Monroe, on the other hand, discovers that it's okay to trust again, even after the wounds of the past. She learns that asking for help doesn't make her weak. And letting someone in doesn't mean losing herself. It means sharing her strength and her heart with someone who will cherish it. At the heart of their journey is the lesson that love isn't about control or possession, but about mutual respect, trust, and the willingness to grow together. Sometimes, love forces us to step outside our comfort zones, to be open to the unexpected, and to let go of the fears that hold us back. In the end, it's the most vulnerable moments that bring us the closest to the ones we love. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more emotional and gripping stories like this one. Stay tuned for more.